Very good. This is Gary Borgendale this evening, and this is Alpha News and First Tuesday Conservatives. We would like to try to do is that we bring a collaborative, obviously, between First Tuesday Conservative and Alpha News. And one of the things, if you realize about Alpha News Minnesota, uh, they are being shadow banned and different things are happening to their news feed. So you want to make sure that you do sign up alphanewsmn.com and to make sure you get the latest information coming out from Alpha News MN. Again, I'm Gary Borgendale. I'm also the local ministry director for AM 980 The Mission, part of the Salem Media Group here in the Twin Cities. I'm just filling in occasionally for your hosting here this evening. But we're able to welcome Dr. Scott Jensen with us tonight. Welcome, Dr. Jensen. He is a past state senator, so he ran for that out in the western suburbs. He's a family practice physician out in Watertown, and now Dr. Jensen has taken that state senator hat off and his doctor hat off, and now he hopes to put a new hat on, and that's called the governor of Minnesota. So welcome, Dr. Jensen. It's good to have you with us this evening.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be with you.
It was interesting. The last time I had you on here, we had you on with Dr. Bob Hamilton, and we had a lot of conversation relative to what was going on in the virus and COVID-19, but we get to talk to a bigger topic tonight. So I'm going to just kind of open it up for you to Dr. Jensen. I guess I will be calling you Scott as we go forward, but tell us about why are you running here for office as governor in Minnesota?
Well, I appreciate the question. And because you've given me a little bit more latitude in time, I can perhaps, rather than just jump in immediately, I can share a couple of backstory thoughts. First, there's an expression that goes like this: if you want to make God laugh, tell him you've got plans. My wife and I have certainly learned that. This was not on our bucket list. The fact of the matter is, over the last 6-8 months, we've gone through a pretty intense time of reflection and meditation and reaching out to people who are very close to us to try to discern what should we do. And frequently, our thoughts hearken to the book of Esther in the Old Testament, chapter 4, verse 14, where Mordecai challenges Esther with the thought, have you thought that the reason you're in the position you're in is for such a time as this? And that's where Mary and I landed. We believe that Minnesota is not on a sustainable path. We're a more divided state than we've ever been in my lifetime. And the fact of the matter is, I'm at a point where I think that we need to step up and say, what can we do differently? How can we build bridges? From my perspective, I would say that what I want to do is I want to prepare Minnesota for the future, for challenges, for problems, elevating real science, medical science, not political science. I don't think Governor Walz has been able to do that. I think he's been the victim of groupthink. I think the idea of paying $7 million for a building that would serve as a morgue that's never seen a cadaver is beyond lunacy. As governor, I would absolutely protect Minnesotans, the streets of Minneapolis, the folks living in long-term care facilities, students in schools, small businesses. These folks have been terrified by what decision will Governor Walz make next. When he puts his fingers on the dials and turns them, how will it land? How will it feel? I promise Minnesotans that I'll preserve the way we govern ourselves. We will have 3 branches of government, co-equal. The legislature will go through the process of debating and discussing and vetting legislative possibilities. The judiciary will provide oversight, and the governor will weigh in many different manners, but certainly with his pen, either vetoing or signing legislation. That's how it's supposed to work. I believe Minnesotans have been disrespected. One size doesn't fit all for us. We have a large geographic state. We've got communities that are tiny. We've got cities that are huge. Hennepin County and Kitson County in northwestern Minnesota are not the same. Population density isn't the same. Infrastructure needs aren't the same. Broadband access isn't the same. And certainly teaching in schools isn't the same. There are kids in greater Minnesota that have such terrible internet access that entire days will pass by whereby they won't be able to connect to their teachers. Nothing will happen. As a governor, I think I would bring to the table an unusual transparency because that's just my nature. I think I'd be a unique candidate in that I'm not really interested in politics. I'm more interested in solving problems. I would be respectful. I don't think you're going to hear me refer to large groups of people as rocks and cows or 19-year-old cooks. That's not who I am. I'd speak to all Minnesotans, especially the folks who feel like their voices have been ignored. And I would insist on telling the truth because I know what to say tomorrow if I tell you the truth today. I don't have to wonder. That's where we need to be. We should be focusing on things like real science, not political science. We should be focusing on secure elections, on how do we help our students learn. Our educational system is broken. We should fund kids, not broken institutions. And we need to focus on safety. Seniors in long-term care facilities don't feel safe. Students don't feel safe when they don't know if tomorrow they'll be denied the chance to participate in extracurricular sports because of the results of a test that has an unacceptably high level of false positives. Students have had an entire year obliterated from their life that they'll never retrieve. For seniors, we're talking about proms and farewells and graduations. For second graders, we're talking about reading. For kindergartners, we're talking about how to learn how to deal with adults without half of the face being covered up. These are the things we've gone through. For 40 years, I have had the privilege of being the voice for my patients. And now I seek a challenge beyond anything I've ever attempted before. And that's to be the voice for Minnesotans. Together, I think that we can heal Minnesota, but we have to do it together.
Well, that's very good, Scott Jensen, who is with us tonight here, and as he talks about his campaign for governor of Minnesota. So, Scott, I just want to pull out a couple of things out of there as you talk about that. Talk about the education component. How do you see we need to move into that area and fix some of those things? I think you identified that broadband is a very important component, but maybe there might be others that you'd really emphasize from an education standpoint.
That's a great question, Gary. And we can talk about broadband, and it is important. But I think if we're going to go back to the root of the problem, I think we've got to go back to parents and teachers, because that's the chemistry that has to work. Parents know best how their children learn, how their children respond to various stimuli. Some kids learn audio. Some kids learn visual. Some kids learn with their hands on the object. That's nothing new. We've had that for hundreds of years. But it seems today our system of education is literally using a cookie cutter approach that says, this is the way you'll learn, or you're not going to be very successful. We can't have a teachers union determine how we're going to solve our problems, because we've got big problems. In Minnesota, we have literally become second to the state of Mississippi in some of the reading and writing and arithmetic scores in 5th and 8th grade. Literally, we had
unacceptable.
We were one of the top 3 or 4 in the nation for decades, and we sit second to Mississippi. This isn't working. I was in the legislature long enough to see the quibbling and the bickering every session. Are we going to provide 2% plus 2% for the next 2 years? Or are we going to go 1%, 2%, 1.5%, 2%? It's ridiculous. We're not solving the problem. Achievement gaps are increasing. Racial inequities aren't being improved. We're not fixing it. So we need to start saying, parents get to have more choice. The dollars need to follow the kids. We need to have teachers be the professionals that they are. Come alongside the parents. Help the parents work with their kids to get kids the best education they can. If you look at us internationally, our education system is failing. So from an education perspective, it's time to move the unions and the politicians and the bureaucrats aside. We've got to put front and center teachers and parents. And parents, if they don't have the skill set or the confidence to help identify how their kids will best learn, then we need to have the teachers help even more. We need to pick up those 3 to 5-year-olds who are at risk. We don't need to have public education provided free for every 3 to 5-year-old across Minnesota. We need to identify the 20 to 25% of kids who are at risk to make sure that they don't fall behind in those critical years. We got to stop pandering to the media. We got to start solving real problems. That's what we have.
And educating our children. Thank you very much for that, Scott Jensen. Let's go to another topic. You talked a little bit about a scientific approach to things as opposed to political science. One of the things I look at in Minnesota is that we have this great healthcare system, and I just am baffled that current administration would still like to look at one system pays all as opposed to utilizing the great avenues of private enterprise with medicine in Minnesota. Any response to that component of the scientific community and how we grow that here in Minnesota, Scott?
Let's start with an example, Gary. Let's go back to 1976. The Legion's convention had ended in Philadelphia. People had gathered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they went home. And what happened? Over the 1 to 5 days when they left Philadelphia, people were falling ill. They had Legionnaire's disease.
Correct.
We didn't know what to do. What did doctors do? We hospitalized patients. We treated them with intravenous antibiotics, the ones we thought would work. And you know what happened? People died, and they kept on dying. And finally, some doctor tried a different antibiotic, not a very glamorous one, just good old-fashioned erythromycin. And you know what happened? We started saving lives. That's what we did. We didn't have the government step in and say doctors can do this or can do that, but that's it. We didn't interfere with the patient-doctor relationship. We had doctors talking to patients, making assessments, telling the patients, this is what we think is a problem, and treating patients. That's what we need to do. That didn't happen with COVID-19. We had bureaucrats, politicians step in and say, patients, you don't get access to these 3 or 4 choices on the menu. You go home and get well on your own. And if you don't, when you're sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, we'll admit you. But by the way, once we admit you, some of those options you might have had previously are now gone because they won't work. We had governors stopping pharmacies from filling physician prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine for 65 years plus has been on the World Health Organization's essential list of medications. It's a safe medicine. My wife was on it for 15 years for arthritis. I have a lot of confidence with that medicine. There is no reason why a patient and I cannot make that decision together if a patient wants to try that. We have had so many disasters with the way we have taken care of COVID-19. We have allowed panic to absolutely drive the agenda. Physicians and patients have not been allowed to do what they normally would do. And so the high quality, superior medical care that's been available in Minnesota literally got kicked to the curb. So we've had people dying. In New York, we had people dying in droves because we treated those patients like we thought we should. We put them on ventilators. We increased the pressure. And instead of 40% of people on ventilators dying, it went to 80%. Going on a ventilator became a death sentence. The New York physicians learned quickly. They backed off. New techniques were addressed. New techniques were found. And we've gotten better. Physicians like me have said vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc make a lot of sense. Try to strengthen your immune system. Get off the couch. Lose 5 pounds.
Yes,
Walk.
yes.
This is what we said. This is all hands on deck, folks. COVID-19 is no hoax. It's a big deal, and it's killed a lot of folks. How many might be debatable. The only way we're going to ever learn that is to do an audit. But the fact of the matter is, Minnesota doctors and Minnesota patients weren't allowed to be as good as they could have been because they're not as good as they could be when they're separated. And that's what happened.
And I think we are finding one of the key issues for Scott Jensen. I could hear the passion coming out. And you look at the people across the state of Minnesota, they were looking for options. What can I do personally to help increase my immune system? The government never said anything about that. And I thank you for stating that, because God created us with a body to deal with this. And that doctor-patient relationship that you're describing, let's look at these different options that might work for them. So I really encourage you to keep honing in that, because that affects all of Minnesota in what they were told. And some of the times they were told things that were the wrong thing, and yet they were forced to believe it. So I highly encourage you to really continue to focus in on that. I'm not supposed to talk as much like this. I'm supposed to ask the questions, but I get engaged in this stuff a little bit as well. So really, I hear from you about the importance of the scientific community and how it relates to the medical area. What would you say are another 2 or 3 issues that really stand out? And this is what I'm hanging my hat on in this campaign. I understand that they may change over the course of the campaign, but what do you see those other 2 or 3 major issues there?
Safety and secure elections. People say there's no proven demonstration of massive voter fraud. What a cop-out. What a cop-out. If you go back and look at the last 20 years of elections, you will find cries of shenanigans in elections from the Republicans, from the Democrats, from the independents. Frequently, it has to do with who wins and who loses.
In Minnesota.
Absolutely. The fact of the matter is, we know that there are harvesting of ballots that goes on. We know that there's been illegal vouching. We know that the absentee voting system has been abused at times. I know personally that dead people have voted because they were my patients that died. I know personally people who are so demented that they don't know their name are voting, and I don't know how they could vote without having an excess amount of assistance. I think we got to quit playing politics and just acknowledge that we could do better. Let's make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat. Let's put a focus on making sure that every ballot that gets in the box is an eligible ballot. Why do we have such an emphasis to stuff the box with as many ballots as possible? I don't want my vote to be nullified by someone who shouldn't be voting. And don't tell me that I'm trying to take away someone else's right to vote. I'm not. I just think secure elections are critical for Americans to have confidence in our elections, because that's how you have peaceful succession in leadership roles. And I think when it comes to safety, Gary, I think people should go back and look at Newark, New Jersey and Detroit, Michigan in 1955. And they'll look at it in 1970, after the civil rights movement and the riots had so much devastating impact on some communities, including Detroit and Newark. Everybody thought that Detroit and Newark would bounce back. Wonderful cities at one time. Detroit, the city of gold, the big automakers, everything going their way. It's been 50 years. These cities have not bounced back. Minnesotans are being unduly naive if they think Minneapolis will bounce back just because of Minnesota nice. It's not going to happen. The fact of the matter is, you're going to see a pretty small number of people in comparison to in the past interested in going to an 8 o'clock baseball game and having to leave Minneapolis at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. You've had 95 restaurants close in Minneapolis. There may be more closing. The fact of the matter is, we don't feel safe on our streets. The number of people that applied to be able to carry a gun, permit to carry, doubled in 2020. The fastest growing group of people buying handguns is women. People do not feel safe. And certainly, people living in long-term care facilities don't feel safe. They feel locked down, locked in, and their families are locked out. And that was after governors' policies piped active COVID disease right into the facilities. And as I mentioned before, students aren't feeling safe. And small business owners are wondering when they'll be shut down next. Lockdowns and school closures have been demonstrated over and over again across the world. They don't work. This has been crazy. We have sacrificed science, which is the process of observing and measuring and hypothesizing. That's what science is. We have sacrificed it at the altar of panic.
A couple of questions that have come in, and thank you for those who are viewing tonight on Alpha News MN, as well as First Tuesday Conservative. I will never spend another dime in Hennepin and Ramsey County because of media blames on COVID. Trust me, I'm out of state Minnesota. That's why an older generation has done away with them. I'm not exactly sure of the full context of that, but I think you're correct in stating that until it's safe in those Ramsey and Hennepin counties, it's going to be a hard time for people to come down there. I want to circle back on that safety component, not in so much in the nursing homes, but in the safety of the streets in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I know that's different than being the mayor of those cities, but as governor, what would you be looking at to do to enhance that safety and security in downtown St. Paul and Minneapolis?
It's all about communication. It's about relationships. The governor should be meeting with leaders of the minority communities and leaders of the city council and the mayor virtually every day. The governor should be walking the streets, talking to people. The National Guard should be available. The police chief should be listened to. People that want to talk about defunding the police or getting rid of the police should be laughed at and scoffed at. That's silly talk. You don't have freedom if you don't have laws. I mean, if it's just a free-for-all and whoever's the biggest, meanest person on the block gets to rule what's going on, that's not freedom. Christians, Jews, Muslims, we all know that it's within the context of laws that we get our freedom. So honestly, we've had the silliest darn discussions take place on some of these issues of safety on the streets of Minneapolis. And I think the person who asked that question in part is saying, hey, I don't want to be a part of taking part of my paycheck to have Minneapolis rebuilt. I want Minneapolis to rebuild itself. Now, I don't know how that's going to settle out. But the fact of the matter is, when Governor Walz and Mayor Fry declined to protect the 3rd Precinct building, declined to protect the streets, said that it was okay to riot without masks, did all these hypocritical things, people basically said, I've had enough. And in the weeks and months afterwards, when we heard that the city council wanted to defund the police, we just shook our head. This kind of silliness, frankly, a Dr. Seuss book has more intelligence.
Unless it's banned by the organization that way in our cancel culture. I do want to jump in on a question that has come up here from one of our listeners in here. What about the legalization of marijuana? In Minnesota, we do have medical marijuana, but we do not have full recreational marijuana. As a doctor with that information, how do you respond to that question about legalizing marijuana to a recreational state?
That's a great question. And I would take a page out of President Trump's book. I think one of the things that President Trump taught us was his playbook said, have these tough discussions head on, whether you're talking DACA, the wall, NATO, NAFTA, have it head on. I think it's a good idea for Minnesota to have that discussion. Do I support recreational marijuana being legalized? I don't. I don't think we're ready for it. I don't know if we'll ever be ready for it. If it were up to me, I don't think 201 legislators get to determine. I'd put it on the ballot maybe in 5 years and have Minnesota vote on it as a constitutional ballot. But what I think we can talk about, and well, we can talk about it all, but one thing I think we can do something about is the medical marijuana plan, the medical cannabis plan has been extremely helpful for many patients. A couple of patient types, if you will, that really I focus on are chemotherapy for cancer. Patients tolerate their chemotherapy so much better with THC as an anti-nauseant versus using our typical pharmacology drugs. Another group is kids with autism. A lot of kids with autism do much better. But I think we can have a serious discussion about decriminalizing trivial amounts of marijuana. I think a 19-year-old kid that makes a mistake and gets caught with a joint in his pocket shouldn't necessarily have to have that on his record for the next 10 years, especially when you look at who's being convicted of such a crime and who's committing it. The fact of the matter is the data is in. If you're Black, you have a much greater chance of having the full force of the law come down on you. We know it's not being equitably enforced. So the fact of the matter is, if you are caught with a trivial amount and you have no similar offenses in a year, why not go ahead and, if you will, expunge the record? Right now, we have a law that says that if you have more than 45 grams of marijuana on you, now 45 grams, you're not in the business of selling, but if you have more than 45 grams on you, you can be convicted of a felony and go to prison. But if you have 35 grams, it's a misdemeanor. Does that make sense? We need to have thoughtful discussions as to how we can deal with this better. And I'm not going to shy away from those discussions. But in terms of legalizing recreational marijuana, I oppose it because I don't think we can handle it.
Okay, good response. Now I want to jump a little bit into our current governor. And how would you grade our current governor? And how would you do things differently than our current governor?
The first month of the pandemic, I would give him a B. And the reason I'd give him a B is because this was uncharted territory. We didn't know where we were going. He met with his people and he made decisions. A critical mistake he made in that first month was he decided to rely on his team. I think that was a mistake. He should have had a parallel group, a group that isn't beholden to him, a group that isn't going to genuflect in front of him and say, yes, sir, yes, sir. When do you want me to jump, sir? It should have been a group of skeptics. It should have been a group of mixed men and women, minorities and whites. And they should have gotten together and they should have challenged him. The first month, I think everybody would say, we didn't know. But when he ended the lockdown, when he closed the schools, when he started to use a cookie cutter approach and said, doesn't matter if you're in Kitson County in Minnesota or in Hennepin County, I'm making the rules. When he started to treat Minnesota citizens as a king would treat his subjects, instead of being a governor talking with his constituents, he was on slippery slope. So I would give him the first month, I'd give him a B. By the time he got to the third month, he's getting a D. And when he started buying morgues for $7 million, and when he did a lottery system, we had months and months to prepare for the rollout with the vaccine. When he's denied schools the ability to make their own decisions, everything was cumbersome. Everything was complicated. When he chose to not audit the death certificates, all he needed to do is say, we're going to have an audit because it appears that we're using COVID-19 as a cause of death, even if it had nothing more than just a peripheral contribution to it. When the CDC made a decision to no longer insist that the cause of death had to be the underlying cause of death, and instead, if it happened to be COVID-19, all it had to do was be a contributing factor. You could have someone with stage 4 colon cancer on hospice in the throes of death, and in the last day of their life, identified as having a positive PCR test, and that's being called a COVID-19 death. That was ridiculous. That's just inflating the numbers. At that point in time, when I raised that point, all Governor Walz needed to do was say, we're going to audit this because it behooves all of us to have good, reliable data. That was when he slipped in my book.
And what happened to you when you raised that question? What was the blowback onto you, Scott Jensen, as a doctor?
Numerous times I have in my medical license investigated. Literally, my livelihood has been threatened. Is it from someone whose care I didn't succeed in? No. This is from people who never met me. This is from people I don't know their names. This is from anonymous accusers who went online and filled out a paragraph online complaining of 2 or 3 sentences. I'm a reckless danger to public health. I'm spreading misinformation because I compared the flu to COVID-19, just like Dr. Fauci did and Dr. Osterholm. These were the things that happened to me when I came out. And I think Governor Walz didn't do anything in terms of saying, let's do whatever we can to get more reliable data. And
let's have this conversation. Let's have this discussion. And if we need to make changes, we can make changes.
Absolutely. I remember someone asking me, well, have you reached out to them? Yes, I reached out to them. I reached out to the Department of Health. I never got any response. I was a sitting senator. I never got any response.
Yeah. So I want to go back to a little bit that you included in kind of your opening statement, Scott. And we are talking with Scott Jensen, who is now running for Minnesota governor. He's a former state senator and also is a practicing physician in family practice in Watertown. But now he's looking at a new hat here as a governor of Minnesota. But tell us again, Scott, why are you running for governor of Minnesota?
I think we're seeing failed leadership. I think we're on an unsustainable path, and this isn't the Minnesota I grew up in. I think we need to protect and preserve and prepare for the future. And the fact of the matter is, we haven't. I would bring to the table a different approach. I think the family doctor approach, solving problems, being the voice of their patients, wanting to be the voice of Minnesota would be different. I'm no professional politician. I think we've had enough of that. I think we need people to tell the truth. We need people to be transparent. I don't think we're getting that. I think we can do better. I don't see a path towards healing Minnesota. I think Governor Walz was slow to lead in terms of election security. He made it sound like everything was hunky-dory. I think Governor Walz was slow to say, let's have good data. I think he was slow to come out and say, we're not going to do immunity or vaccine passports in this state. People were so fearful. Governor Walz knows what's going on. He knows that there's virtually a de facto mandate emerging in our very society. Come out and say it. Tell Minnesota, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to force you into having a vaccine. We're going to try to provide you as much education as we can. But at the end of the day, I'm going to respect the people of Minnesota. I'm going to respect that people get a choice. I'm going to respect that we all get health freedom. Governor Walz didn't do that. This feels like a king talking to his subjects, not a governor speaking with his constituents.
Good. Let's change course a little bit and let's get to know Scott Jensen and who he is. And so tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to school, your wife, your family. So let's get a little just of the personal information of who Scott Jensen is.
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, middle child of 5, 3 brothers and a sister.
Was that on the banks of Plum River or Plum Creek?
Not Plum Creek, it was Cottonwood Creek.
Okay, I was thinking a Little House on the Prairie in Sleepy Eye. So
Grove, and they traveled.
Okay, excuse me.
Fort Ridgely, yes. But I like the way you're thinking. So anyway, I had a great childhood. My mom was my best friend. My dad was my hero. I went to Sleepy Eye Public High School. I had a chance to play sports, not because I was any great athlete, but because there weren't too many kids in my class. And then I went to the
That has a tendency to work out well if you want to play sports, if there's not a lot of people in your class. How many were in your graduating class?
67.
Okay, I had 75 in mine, so it's kind of like in that same neighborhood there. Keep going, Scott.
I went to the University of Minnesota undergraduate and studied physiology. And tragically, right in my 2nd or 3rd year of college, my mom died of colon cancer in her 40s. I went to dental school and I was president of the class, and it was a wonderful experience, but I just didn't really have a love affair with teeth. So the logical thing, and I took a leave of absence and I went to the seminary. And I studied.
What seminary did you go to?
I went to Luther Seminary.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful year. And I made 2 big decisions that year. I decided to ask my girlfriend to marry me, and we've now been married 43 years. And I also decided to go into medical school. And so I went into medicine. I finished a residency in family practice. I went to Wabasha, Minnesota, practiced for a couple of years, and then I moved to Watertown with my wife and 3 kids, and we've been there ever since.
Well, great. Now, and you have 3 kids, is that what you said?
Yeah, my 3 children, girl, boy, girl, anesthesiologist, lawyer, family doctor. My wife had a fascinating career. She's a veterinarian, and she spent a good portion of her career dealing with exotic animals. So if I came home and told her that I had an interesting patient in with pneumonia, she might tell me that she had an interesting boa constrictor in with pneumonia. I'd outdo her in terms of that. She had interesting.
Had to be interesting conversations over the dinner table talking about your different patients like that.
Always, always.
Well, Scott, do you have any, where can people go to get more information, and where can they donate for your campaign?
Well, thank you, Gary, for asking that. I think the best place to go for information, because there's lots of issues that we didn't cover tonight too, but just go to drscottjensen.com. That's our website, DRSCOTTJENSEN, drscottjensen.com. You'll see our launch video, which I think is quite compelling. The only way we're going to flip a blue state red is by a groundswell approach. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of Minnesotans saying enough is enough. We need to return to a conservative perspective. And we need to remember what a conservative perspective is. The word conservative comes from Latin conservare, and it means to safeguard. So when someone's conservative, that means that they're focused on safeguarding. What do we want to safeguard? We want to safeguard our children and our families. We want to safeguard our freedom to worship as we choose and our freedom of speech. We want to safeguard our water and our natural resources. That's what a conservative should be about. And if you want to do that, you need to step up. We need your help. $10, $20, volunteer. Please help us.
And by the way, one of the things I noticed, Scott, that when you're running for an office like this, you've raised, last time I saw, over $200,000. Where are you at now at that the money you've raised?
We're getting close to $300,000. We've had 500 people sign up to help in innumerable fashions. I started a TikTok account about a month ago, and we have about 300,000 followers on TikTok, about 250,000 followers on Facebook. My Twitter account has increased by 50%. People have been wonderful, just wonderful. So I appreciate that. Thank you. But we all need to get involved. We all need to recognize that we need to be relevant. We need to rescue ourselves. And if we do, truly, we can have a renewal. We really can have a renewal. And in that renewal, we'll get safety. Our kids will do better. We'll fund the kids. We'll quit funding broken institutions. We'll give parents choice. And we'll be a better state. And we'll heal.
That's good information. There's a couple questions. I'm going to try and take these if I can here so we get responses to them. Can the teachers union be reformed? They seem to be power unto themselves. Children need to reform to school for education and social benefits. Would you get children back into physical classrooms? If so, how? I think there's a couple questions there. The first one is getting children back into the classrooms. How would you go about doing that one?
I would just demand it. I would say that if they're not going to be in the classroom, then the teachers aren't going to be paid. I mean, enough is enough. We've excised a year out of these kids' lives, and we know that this kind of education doesn't cover anywhere near the material. Teachers know it. And then let me unpack the other question. Can teachers union be reformed? Absolutely. It's going to take a groundswell approach from the teachers, but it can be done. Unions in and of themselves bring value to the equation. No question. There are things that otherwise get overlooked. But we cannot have the kids be pawns in this system of education. Kids are the center point. No one else. It's kids and what they learn. They're the future. We have got to do better.
And Scott, I think that's a very good point about the reform of the teachers union and the teachers who are very, very qualified people. They can do that within their own organization and make their own organization more accountable to the students and to the parents as well. So I think that's a very good idea. Let me see if we have any more questions. I kind of want to just get as much as we can here before we come to the end. Yeah, that I guess is really the key questions from that standpoint. Do you have any events coming up yet, Scott?
We're starting to have quite a few events. We're going to be going out and speaking at rallies for small businesses that have been closed down. We want to help those folks as much as possible.
So there might be a few restaurants that you would go and hit to?
Exactly. And we need to, we had 10,000 fans at the stadium today. We need to start connecting once again. Humans are not meant to live physically distanced. That's not who we are. So we need to start getting out. We need to have our community festivals, our county fairs. We need to once again re-engage and realize that the collateral damage of COVID-19 has probably killed more people than COVID-19 itself.
Amen. Well, this is Gary Borgendale. We've been listening to Scott Jensen as he is sharing his thoughts about running for governor in Minnesota and as his campaign is launched. Scott, where can they again go to get more information about your campaign?
I would ask people to go to our website, drscottjensen.com, drscottjensen.com. Watch our launch video, volunteer, step up. We need you. Again, in order for us to be the state we can be, all Minnesotans need to be relevant. And we all have to recognize that we're not in a good place. And that means we have to work, each one of us, towards helping rescue our state. And when we do, there will be hope on the other side of things. And then we can become who and what we've been in the past.
Very good. And two, if you'd want to donate to their campaign, you can go to their website as well. And I just encourage you to support Scott and his campaign efforts as well. So very good, Scott. We thank you for this night and good luck to you as you continue down the road running for governor in Minnesota. And again, this is Gary Borgendale for Alpha News MN and for First Tuesday Conservatives. And thank you, audience, too, for your questions that you had for us today. We tried to get to most of those, and we will tune in next time as we have more conversations about how to change Minnesota to the right. And this is Gary Borgendale and saying good night. Thank you again, Scott. Good night.
Thank you, Gary.